morning, everyone. I'm Saleha, and this is Chai, Chat, and Community. We are doing the webcast at a different time today, and we'll revert to our usual Sunday 8 p.m. from next week. But today's conversation is a bit different, a bit triggering, and I have my co-host Veena, and joining both of us today is Professor Manjula O'Connor, who is a well-known figure in the community. But before we start talking about family violence and the recent events, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we are meeting this morning and pay my respects to the elders, past, present, and emerging. Thank you for joining us, Manjula.
Thank you,
Um,
Sneha, for inviting me.
and everybody knows Manjula. She's a clinical psychiatrist and author, a clinical researcher with special interest in migrant and women's health, family violence, and complex trauma and trauma therapy. She is a well known figure in the community and successfully led the dowry abuse campaign in Australia, which culminated in a law change in Victoria. She does relentless work with women suffering family violence. And Veena, my co host, is a counselor, and we work together in a few projects. So, very happy to welcome her. And this is her first webcast with me, and hopefully, we will continue to host these webcasts together.
Yeah.
Before we start our conversation with Manjula, if you find any of the conversation triggering, please call 000 if you are in immediate danger. You can also call 1 800 RESPECT, which is 1 800 737 732, or Safe Steps on 1 800 015 188, or Indian Care. We will write these numbers for you at the end of the webcast so that you can get in touch with them. Manjula, the past week's events has been shocking to say the least. So, before we start, can you share the work that you do and a little bit something about yourself, please?
Yes. So I'm a psychiatrist and have been working in women's mental health for more than 30 years in the city in my private practice. I previous to that I trained in the old-fashioned psychiatric hospitals like Royal Park and Rundle on schizophrenia and severe depressions. And then I trained in migrant mental health, and I actually worked there as a consultant in Footscray for about 3 years. And also in geriatric mental health. So, I have a very broad experience in psychiatry, and I held leadership roles through much of that period as consultant in charge of units. And so I started work around 2006 in when I had to give a talk on suicide uh, in Indian women. And at that time, we didn't have that many people in Australia of Indian origin in 2006. They were just starting to come, the students. And I then went to India and I worked intermittently there teaching, as well as I taught psychology students, PhD students, master students at a university called Dev Sanskrit Vishwavidyalaya in Haridwar. It was a great experience, and I went there twice a year. They gave me accommodation in this beautiful campus in Haridwar, and I reconnected with my heritage during that time, and I worked with some of the organizations that were working around domestic violence at the time, and also a little bit with mental health organizations. And I relearned the Indian family dynamic and Hindi language because I had almost forgotten it after being here for so long. So I saw the pattern of patriarchal dominance at every level of society, of family, of home, at individual level, in business, at hospitals. The patriarchal dominance in 2006 was very profound. And 2008 9, I started to see in Melbourne students, women students, Indian students, because by that time quite a few had come because we were getting almost 40,000 students a year at that point. Um, and women started to come with panic attacks and depression to see me in the city. And when I dug deep, I realized and I found that this was connected with the domestic violence and dowry demands. And some of the students told me that you'll be surprised, young women told me that you'll be surprised how common that is amongst our cohort in Melbourne. The demands for dowry and dissatisfaction with dowry giving rise to physical violence and abuse. And you, maybe you were not here in Melbourne or you were. We had a run of suicides and murders uh, in Indian community from 2009 till 2015.
I remember that.
It was absolutely horrific. Um, I think there were 15 people killed in that period of 3 years. And uh, and one in one case, it was a woman who took her life with the two kids or three kids in the house. She set the house alight,
On fire. Yes, I remember that. Yes.
and that uh, people didn't realize, but suicide amongst our women is almost always related to domestic violence. And her husband was in India at the time. So, and then there was another episode in which, a man um, took his children and his wife for a drive in a car and drove them into a ditch,
Yeah.
and somehow all of them were killed. And another one was where a young woman killed her husband and then herself. And we know often that when women murder their husbands, it's always because they have been suffering domestic violence, and there is this huge amount of repressed, powerless rage. Um, and so then I thought, so we worked very hard at the time to bring awareness, at which point, and we were doing work in the community with raising awareness with theater. And that was our very first community theater in 2010. We called that Ghungat. And it broke the silence in the community, but it also brought a lot of backlash against me, a lot of pushback. uh, Certain patriarchs of our society, our community said she does it because she wants publicity for her own clinical practice. Like, I've been in practice at that point for so long in the city. And you don't survive in the city if you are not excellent at your job. It's simple as that. And so I didn't need any more publicity. I was doing this because I felt like I am Indian and I belong to that culture, and I am seeing trauma and I need to do something because the cause of it is preventable. If we all work together, it is preventable. And it is causing so much mental illness and suicide amongst our women, and it's all preventable. And because it's all coming from a lot of it coming from domestic violence. And so the other thing that was set against me was I'm doing it for my own publicity, right? Well, when you're a doctor, you're well known anyway. How much publicity do you want? And then the third one was I was doing it to I was stealing money from grant money that we were getting from the government. When in actual fact, when I started, I put 52,000 of my own money to start my organization. And I've never taken a cent out, ever, out of that organization. And then, like, I just, people just found all kinds of awful things to say about me, but I would I would hear about it, but then I'd go to my consulting room and then I'd hear the most terrible stories from the women I was seeing and how much they were being tortured and abused by their men and mother in laws, and coming to work, going to work, and having their money stolen by the husband and getting it transferred to their own family back in India. And if she ever sent even $10 to her parents, then she had a price to pay, a huge price. And the women would be working. And if she took $5 to have a glass of orange juice, I remember a young student telling me that she had a $5 glass of orange juice and he went crazy at her, that how dare she spend money on her, and it was her own money, her own hard-earned money in a joint account that he controlled. uh, and yet the patriarchs of our society are not worried about the health of our whole society. They're more worried about protecting a false name. And so, but the point is that they haven't been able to stop my work in any shape or form. And we've continued to get grants after grants after grants, and we've done lots of community education activities over the years. We have run hundreds of meetings with people, hundreds of workshops, educated, created research papers published in academic journals, videos. And if anyone who would want to know more about our work, they can go to our website, www.achrh.org, and you will see the amount of work we've done and the dowry abuse campaign that we started. And one of the young women who was killed in that time was Deepshika Godara. And her husband and his family had started to extort money out of her father a week before the marriage, and so
In India.
in India, in Haryana, and they couldn't say no because it was all about shame of the marriage. The adverts have gone out, everybody's ready to. So actually, they had already given them a huge amount of all the household goods, which were never going to come to Australia because
Who's going to carry it? Yes, of course.
a washing machine and television and fridge and furniture and bed linen and microwave, all that stuff had already been given. And then uh, her father had retired as a teacher and gotten lump sum of money, and somehow these people got to know about it, so they asked him 2 days before the wedding that they want 6 lakh rupees in cash, which was
That's, yes. So that's
most
600,000 rupees for people who don't know what lakhs is. Yep.
600,000 rupees, which was his retirement savings, that on which he was to live. They said we want 6 lakhs, and uh, he said I can't arrange that money in 2 days before the wedding. They said that the wedding is off, and they had already taken the dowry that was given. So then he had to plead with them to let the wedding go ahead, and he will bring the money after the give them the money after the marriage, and which he did. But uh, the abuse of Deepshika never stopped. She came to Australia and they kept on saying to her, your parents are of, of no value. They don't have any standing. They didn't give us enough. Can you see the psychology of that? Telling her that her family is not good enough for them because they didn't get enough dowry. In he is demanding money. He's asking for money. He's begging for money, and he's telling her that your family is not good enough. See how this psychology of entitlement has become so profound and so deep seated that men don't even know what they are saying. In It's unconscious, that sense of entitlement.
Is it
And
unconscious though? Is it unconscious? Is it intergenerational? And we just think it is okay. Veena, Veena's a counselor, and I'm sure she, like you, has people calling her up and talking. But is it unconscious, Manjula?
so, at some level, they are not aware of the power they have and the power they exercise. And because I see some perpetrators, I don't see many, but I do see some in my practice. They are completely unable to see the impact of their behavior on the other person. It is lack of compassion, lack of empathy, lack of awareness about the impact of their behavior on the other person. It is all self centered talk. And when I say unconscious, I mean lack of awareness. And they only become aware of what I'm talking about when I say that, you have a lot of power in the house. Um, no, I don't. Even though they are the one making all the decision, they are the one controlling the money, they are the one asking for dowry, they are the one who are telling the woman what can she wear, where can she go, what kind of job she can have, what kind of friends she can have. And no, I don't. I said, okay, uh, do a role play. Then get them to do a role play. There are two kinds of role plays I do. One is that in one case, I asked the young man to imagine after marriage if he had to relocate to his wife's house to live there, like his wife has to do to him. How would it feel that he now lived in his wife's house where he didn't know anyone, and that was his permanent home now? And how would it feel to him? And what kind of things he would experience or think about? And he couldn't even imagine. You know that he couldn't even imagine it. He had such a barrier. He had a disgust on his face when I even asked him. I pressed him, and then I said, "No, just no. I really do want you to think about it for a second. Just think about it. How would it feel for you to go and live in your wife's home?" And he said, in the end, he said, "I would feel really powerless and bad." I said, "How do you think your wife feels when she is in your home and everybody is, um, she knows nobody and everybody is
So,
criticizing and putting her down? How does that feel?"
so, so basically, people actually gang up against a
Yeah.
new woman, a woman who comes into a new family home.
Yeah. And now I do think it's very important to say that when the families are toxic, like not every family is toxic, right?
Of course, there are always good people, but we are seeing less and less of good people, unfortunately.
Well, I wouldn't say that. I think that there are people who are, very caring and loving, but the fact is that the demands for dowry are now, um, like it's not even a question. People just give it. Parents just give huge amounts. And
And
in
and
India,
Manjula, the sad part is that with education increasing, it should, like, more and more people getting educated, this should have reduced. On the other hand, we are seeing more, like you say, people just give it. It has become such a norm that people are just giving. It is just an understanding that yes, the girl's parents, and even the example that you gave, where the parents of the girls should have called off the marriage and not felt ashamed of it. The people who are asking for the dowry should have felt ashamed for pressing them to do that. They were taking advantage of the situation. But so what a long way we have to go.
so
Changing. Yeah.
sorry. So what happened in that case then was, how the murder came about was that this abuse went on and on and on after she came to Australia, and it went on for 5 6 years. And that money was actually used to pay for his uncle's international student fees in Melbourne. And yet more and more demands kept coming. And every festival, because her father came to stay with me, because he was here to help us out. I had, and it was really good of him. And he came at a holy time one year, and when it was just when we were campaigning for dowry, I think it was 2014. 2014. And so he said that every festival they had to go running to these people's home to give them gifts, because otherwise she would pay for it here by abuse, violence, put downs, and him having extramarital affairs. um, and then her father told me that they had to give them gifts at every birthday in their family, at every wedding, at every festival. And they had to go to a village far away to do this. And when in the end, she got a lot of intervention orders against him, one, I think, and two, maybe two or three, and then she withdrew them.
She
But then
withdrew them.
she withdrew them.
Which is quite
Why?
common, Saleha, which is very common actually, unfortunately.
And because the girls don't want their marriage to break up,
They just
and
want the violence to stop, which never does.
which doesn't happen. And so then she actually, uh, uh, I think she was a physiotherapist. Like, she's not a, I mean, these are all educated women.
Hmm.
So she's physiotherapist. She had a great job, and she at one point, and he's having extramarital affairs all the time. He's drinking heavily, and he's seeing a psychiatrist that she did not know about. But his behavior, and the psychiatrist probably had no idea how much domestic violence he's doing, and he's going there pretending to be the poor victim. Um, and so then she decided to leave him permanently, and there is possibility that she had found a boyfriend at that stage, a white person, I think. Um, and so she told him she's not coming back. And 1 year of intervention order was nearly finished. It was finishing that night. She went to pick up her son, who was staying with him for that weekend, and he killed her at that point. And we don't even know how he killed her, but it appears that he hit her hard at the back of her head with something heavy. And then he uh, drove his car into a oncoming truck, and killed himself.
And the son?
And the poor son is, yeah. So I don't want to speak about that, because that
No,
involves the child.
of course. And somebody at our Alliance event on the 7th of March said something very profound to me, Manjula Mohammed Mayuddin. who is the vice commissioner of, sorry, who's the commissioner of VMC. He said children cry in silence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's incredible, isn't it? We never talk about it. So while we are talking about all this, I want to know, I mean, family violence is not just, within the South Asian community or in the Indian community, it's worldwide. So what are the stats globally, and also what are the stats in South Asia?
Um, Generally speaking, it's about 1 in 3 women across the board,
Globally.
globally. Can you imagine that?
Mm.
Every third woman in the world, on average, has suffered one abuse of domestic violence, which is either physical violence or sexual violence or financial violence or emotional violence or coercive control. Um, and that is if a woman in the surveys that have been conducted across the world reports one episode of abuse, you can imagine that it is not one single abuse that has happened to her. If it was one episode of abuse, you forget about it. You don't remember it.
Mm.
It's only when it is happening repeatedly that you remember about it. So the surveys asked the women about one episode, but in actual fact, we know that these are women who are suffering on a recurrent basis. So that's 1 in 3 women. But when we break it down from according to the what part of the world it is coming from, so it is the highest in our region, Oceania, all the Pacific Islands, and it's highest amongst Latin American countries, like all of South America is very high, and it's very high in India and in South Asia, where it is more like 35% in our part of the where we come from in South Asia. 35% of women have suffered domestic violence, but again, even if you look at India, there is a lot of variation in the regions. There are some regions where it is as high as 52%.
What?
And
What? 52.
yeah, yes, yes, yes.
I'm
And then,
writing down these figures. I can't believe it. Wow.
and in others, like in Delhi, it's about 16%. But I don't believe 16% figure. So, um, because the kind of emotional abuse our women suffer, they get so used to it, they don't even realize that they are being abused. For example, a daughter in law who is told she cannot work outside the home, even though she is highly educated. That is abuse. A daughter in law who cannot speak to her mother for more than 10 minutes a day, that is control. And if she happened to speak to her mother, then to be abused and to be made to feel fearful, that is coercive control. And that's all against the law in the whole world. But our girls don't would not even recognize it as abuse. But the point is that it is this kind of control that if the women have a bit more, if they're more gutsy or they're a bit rebellious or they're a bit more educated and they want to have a choice in life or they want to exercise their individual personality, that's when there is abuse and violence and murders. Now, dowry is another factor for murders in India. The figures currently for dowry murders in India are about 6,000. They were not 6,900 per year. That's a dowry murder happening every hour and a half somewhere
And
in
this
India.
is across India.
Yeah, that's across India.
What's happening in Australia?
So in Australia, we are wanting to do that research now, but a very rough study we did when we put out a survey on India Link and on newspaper for women to fill out across all of Australia. About one third of women out of 176 or 200 responses, I think 200 people replied, about a third had either uh, been personally affected or knew someone who had been affected. So, um, but we
This
are
is the
going to,
21st century, Manjula, where
yes.
more and more women are educated.
And most people who come to Australia are educated migrants. That's how they
Of
get here.
course,
Or they are international students.
who
And
anyway are educated or coming in for higher education.
and so the international student story is a bit more interesting because the parents have to pay fees for them when they're getting married. The parents think, well, they need to extort that money out of the bride's family because she's going to get to have such a great life in Australia, so she should, she should compensate them for that. Well, and that's what in one tweets one of the young men said to me that, what should she bring to the table? Well, I said she's bringing herself to the table. She's going to come and live here and she's going to earn money that's going to
Yes.
contribute to the wealth of the house. She's going to produce children that are going to create your next generation.
So, Manjula, here comes my next question to you. In many cases and in many groups that we are both part of, we keep reading about mother in laws being perpetrators along with husbands and husbands' family. Why is it that our women are so much part of this malice, which we just cannot seem to stop? Why
So that
is it intergenerational? Is it conditioning? What is it? I'm sorry, these are not part of the questions you and I talked about, but I'm just amazed and just shocked at the figures that you're giving me.
so the theory. So now we come to the research and the theory about why domestic violence actually happens. It's a very complex issue, and years of research has now given us uh, a, essentially this finding that domestic violence essentially is about abuse of power and control. And you can then, um, and that wherever there is inequality in access to power and control and resources, meaning money and so on, one person has more of it, they are in a position to abuse that over the other person who has less of it. Now, when you translate that within the home situation, most people, the gender who has most power is men. They are the ones who make decisions. They are the ones who have to, they determine the direction in which their whole family is heading. Often, they're the ones who control the money and they're the ones who control what their wife more or less goes to work and, so on. But, and so the question is, why, when women are the ones who are suffering domestic violence most often than men. So in Australia, the figures are 1 in 16 men suffer domestic violence, and women it's 1 in 4 or 1 in 3, depending on how you measure it. Um, that so more women suffer domestic violence. So what is this thing that mother-in-laws are doing? Like they are women doing domestic violence against women. And we have mother in laws and sister in laws doing the same thing against the daughter in law. And they all gang up with the husband against his wife, and he also goes with them. So why the mother-in-law? Because mother-in-law was a daughter-in-law once who was powerless in the family. She suffered that abuse, she suffered that oppression, and she carried that resentment in her head always. And she can't take it out against her husband or her sons because they are men. She takes it out against her daughter-in-law. It's an abuse of power, and she tastes that power for the first time when the son's born. She suddenly gets a status in the family,
It's
and then
shocking.
she gets it after he gets married and brings a wife home. And so, if this mother-in-law is a toxic person, and she is uh, greedy and toxic, then she will destroy the family. Because a lot of the times, the men themselves, they're really quite happy with their wife. It's when the mother-in-law starts to manipulate their brain and the sister-in-law comes in. And especially, it's worse against those daughter-in-laws who are more educated than their husbands, who are earning more, or who are more smarter and more assertive.
And the women still stay on.
And yet, and then this is the other part about in our culture, what it is that marriage and family is a part of our unconscious brain going back 7,000 years of when the first description of a marriage and a family is written in Rig Veda. When I was writing my book, Daughters of Durga, and I did research on the history of our culture, I was absolutely amazed at how, when no one in the world was talking about marriage, India already had a system of marriage and a system of patri patrilocal patrilineal culture, meaning the the bride must relocate to her husband's home, and that it's the boys who will carry the family name. Except,
I did read on Twitter a few months ago that there's a GP in the UK who now wants young women, who's now promoting young children who are born to parents should carry the mother's name because the mother does all the hard work. And I
yeah,
hope it happens. I hope it happens in our lifetime.
yeah, or at least the child should have both the names of both the parents, and that uh, so the thing is that the when the I've lost my thread. So when the boys are born, uh, our society gives them so much privilege, so much attention, uh, that and as compared to when the girls are born, that it is a tradition that yes, we need to change it. And so in the UK, there is a campaign called Pink Laddu.
Yes, I know. Yeah, I read that all the time. I love
Yeah,
it.
yeah. So when the girls are born, now they are giving out pink laddus. Um, and so, uh, and we see that in India with the boys to males to female ratio, of infanticide and female selective abortions and things like that, uh, which you'll be surprised to hear happens in Australia as well.
Really? Oh,
Yeah.
because you can do a sex test here, of course.
Mhm. and there are no laws against abortion. So you can go and get tested and then have an abortion. And so what is happening is that the ratio of boys to girls is much higher in the second baby, not in the first baby. So when a girl is born, um, the first child girl, parents are happy, great, we got a child, and we are good parents. We didn't abort. See, we got a girl. Um, and when the second child is a girl, that's being aborted until they get a boy.
And
And
women are part of the problem then, isn't it? Because
absolutely, and
they are aborting their girl.
that's it. So they are upholding the patriarchal system. It's the women who uphold the patriarchal system. And um, so what happens is that if they get the first child is a boy, um, then great, everyone's so absolutely happy. And so the second child is a boy, well, that doesn't get aborted, right? That's kept. And but if that was a girl, that would be aborted. So when people say we are only doing it to balance our family, so we have a girl and a boy, no, that's not correct. So the numbers go in favor of the boys. So the biggest male to female ratio is in the Chinese community and
Wow.
in the Vietnamese and in some of the Eastern European countries and India. So it's a patriarchal system that women themselves uphold, and so then our issue for us is this thing about keeping the family together. And so keeping the family together is kept together through many pressures. The societal pressure is huge. So the sense that um, people, the stigma and the shame of being a broken family or being a single mother or a divorced woman is huge. So that's the one thing that keeps people together. But the other thing is often the girls feel guilty about leaving a marriage where their parents have spent a fortune on the wedding. And so I think that that's that that can the spending the fortune on the wedding can easily be fixed by two parties talking to each other and saying we are going to spend half and half, and that should remove this problem of gender inequality in who's paying the most for the wedding. I mean, it's true that Indian weddings are great fun, like the big fat Indian wedding that goes on for 3-4 days. We all love them. I all
10
dress up.
days in Delhi. 10 days in Delhi.
Yeah, right. Okay. And so, dress up and look, everyone looks absolutely $1 million. And, so we don't want to ruin that. We love that. We want to enjoy, but it's what's unfair about it. We want that removed. We want that the boy and the girl should pay equal amounts on their wedding. And and like one father said to me at an SBS show on dowry abuse was, "What's your problem with dowry? We are only there to give. We are only helping our children to get on with life." Good, very good, father. Good on you. What's the boy's father giving, right?
There
And
was somebody told me, Manjula, that in India, and I'm not going to pinpoint to any race or religion, parents know that the so-called groom is not the right person. However, this is an opportunity for their daughter to go live overseas,
Yeah.
to also bargain for their son, who
Yes.
will also gain for it. In one
Yes.
instance, I heard the daughter has been going through family violence for years and years and years, and has been talking to her parents and telling them about what she's going through. And the grandmother said, if you walk out of the marriage, how will we educate our son?
That's it. That there are so many pressures that, and it comes down to there are so many factors here. It's not just one thing. The there is the sense of wanting to live a high life in a high income country,
Not
and
everybody lives a high life, though.
that's what they don't know, because it is the lie that is perpetrated by people living here. They they send fake messages to their family about how much they're earning, what amazing jobs. Everybody is a manager. No one says I'm a taxi driver. No one says I'm a chef. They all say I'm a manager, I'm a project manager, or I am an engineer, or whatever. Like, I don't see there is any shame in saying
Exactly.
I'm a
That
chef.
dignity of labor is not there amongst us, Manjula.
That's right. And so they pretend to be these high level managers earning mega dollars. And then the parents and the family who's poorer back India starts to feel jealous and start to feel like, we want some of your money. And then that man, what is he to do? He takes it out of his wife's salary to send it to keep up the fake image that he's created. Lies upon lies upon lies. Greed, toxicity. Um, Once again, I just want to keep saying, please, no, everybody does not do that. We are talking about small numbers of people here. And that although sending money, everyone does that. Everyone sends money back home. We all do that at some point, because we are wealthier here than our parents in India. Not so much now, not so much in the last few years, where our parents back in India are wealthier than us, even. But still, that's not the case for majority of the people. So people do send, we all send money back home, but in a way that feels comfortable, and that means that that we are not going to jeopardize our own family life, our own mental health, our own financial status, and not create domestic violence. So, one of the plays that we put up with our community theatre SNE in the last 3 years has been around that story, exactly that story. How a young man feels so pressured to send money home to his parents, and how he takes his wife's money and he can't even pay his children's school fees. Um, but he must keep up that pretense, and how much trauma that causes for him. And we asked the audience to tell us, what did they think about it? What should this man do? And a lot of the audience members, particularly the male audience members, felt he was doing the right thing. And but in the end, they all agreed that it was better if he had spoken to his wife and they had come together to create a joint decision to to send money home, but not at the expense of the family and the children's school fees. And that was,
Manjula, yeah, sorry. I have two questions here, and this is going back to the stigma of dowry.
yeah,
Veena, do you want to read the question?
Yeah, so going back to the stigma, I wanted to quickly give an example how deep rooted the conditioning is and the stigma is. That I had a client who was being beaten up by the husband, and her parents asked her to leave the marriage, but she didn't want that tag of a divorcee, and the parents said we would rather have a divorced daughter than to have a dead daughter. And but she kept going. Finally she left and she is fine, but she kept going for a number of years. And it's so sad. She's the younger generation, they are the older generation, but they could understand, and she couldn't do away with the stigma. So Manjula, we know that women suffer in silence, and as has been proven by the recent family violence incident, what steps should women take if they feel they are going through family violence?
So um, the women suffer in silence, and they don't need to, and they don't need to even leave their husband. At least they should go and get, they can speak to 1800 respect in confidence and have regular sessions with them.
But Manjula, why can't they leave the husband if they're going through family violence? The man is not changing. What is still the
Because
stigma in this society? You don't even in India, the divorce rate and the number of single women is rising. But here we seem to be, it's a kind of state of a warp where we are still living in what we have left behind. India has progressed, or South Asia has progressed beyond this definition, or the label that we are so worried about.
I think it's not just the label. I think that as Indian people, we suffer a lot of separation anxiety. We are very tightly bonded people. We don't find it easy to separate. Also, a lot of married women, marriage, it's not an easy thing to walk out of, especially if you don't have the kind of access to resources and social networks like the woman would have back in India. There she's got her family, friends, she's got a work network, she knows the language, she knows where she should get help. And if she is a single divorced woman, uh, she may know how to protect herself from unwanted sexual advances of men. Women are a lot more vulnerable here as migrant women. They are a lot more isolated from the networks. They are a lot more vulnerable, and they don't have often the financial resources like their husbands have. And if they do leave the house, they're going to go and live in poverty somewhere. And so, a lot of women with children who have separated go back to their husbands because it's better to live in a violent situation in a big house and have a good, comfortable lifestyle for their children than living in poor housing and not having enough money, because the men don't often pay child maintenance after separation, because they start to declare themselves as unemployed. And I mean, the women are trapped in so many different ways here, and that separation is, even for non-Indian women, separation is often difficult. And I think I read a figure somewhere, takes women 17 attempts to leave a marriage, an abusive marriage. Long
Wow.
time. So maybe not 17, but it takes them a lot of attempts to
Something
leave it.
around that, yeah. The figure
So
is.
it's a very complex and a difficult situation. Domestic violence is a very difficult problem to solve because, as I said before, power and abuse and control, abuse of power and control is one of those things. But other things add up, like unemployment, like low education level, like uh, alcohol, drugs, um, living in poverty. All of those things contribute as well. So, but having said that, I do want to finish on a optimistic note that less women are killed now than there were 10 years ago or 20 years ago. So that women homicide from domestic violence rate has come down, but we would like it to be zero. Why should a woman get killed in her home where she should be safe? Why should she be feeling fear for herself in a home that she has helped to create? Um, and the other thing is that the domestic violence rates also have come down. In Australia, it's roughly 1 in 4 women,
That's
whereas,
not good enough, though.
but it's not good enough, but it has come down from 1 in 3. But generally speaking, a lot more needs to be done, and um, we need a lot of support from men in order to make sure that there is that peer pressure to, not let men feel like they can, it's okay to abuse their women. Like, I've heard the most terrible stories of men saying to their women, I am the boss of this house. You will say you will do what I say. If I say you clean my shoes, you will do that. But
Veena, you had a question. Sorry. Yes. But Manjula, sorry I interrupted you then.
Yeah, Manjula, let's bring the other aspect in. Religion is something that unites us.
yeah,
What role do faith leaders have to play in this, and how successful has it been?
I am afraid to say that faith leaders have not been successful at all in creating the kind of awareness they could, because faith leaders have power over their congregation, but faith leaders, if they speak too loudly about it, are likely to become unpopular with their congregation. So they try not to say too much about it. And so, but having said that, I do work very closely with the ISKCON temple, which I am so proud to say are at the forefront of this. And having said that, all of the religions like Christianity and Buddhism, I mean, they're all trying to create some kind of programs within their religious structures to help, but I don't believe that there is, women who need help sometimes don't get the right advice. They don't get help. They don't get sent to right places for help. So it is a lot. There's a lot of work that needs to be done there by the faith leaders.
I guess if they have a better understanding of what it really means, what family violence means, and how it impacts the children in particular as well, because they are going to be the next generation, then they would be, if they are convinced that, okay, this is what is happening and they need to do something about it, they would be able to convey it in a better way, I guess.
Yes, in theory, yes, it can work if they. But like for example, I am working with the Egyptian church to actually educate their um, leadership, religious leadership, and that is uh, very progressive thing for them to do.
Hmm.
Uh, and that it's so important to learn the impact of domestic violence on the family. It's
Yeah.
huge. The children do not thrive, they don't do well at school, they can become depressed. The girls become depressed and suicidal, and the boys become aggressive and suicidal and go into drugs or go into domestic violence. And And family is the basic unit of society. If the family is not functioning, the society doesn't function.
Exactly, and that is family is the most powerful unit of society, and hence the country as such. Because happier families and better families means a stronger country, and also that the child when grows up, either they'll become somebody who will be abused because they'll normalize, they'll be like it's okay because my mother took it or my father took it, or they will become an abuser themselves because that's what they have learned and that's what they have seen, and both the scenarios are really bad, because we have to come back to respect where they neither abuse somebody nor get abused by someone.
So
So
yes, so basically, the the thing that I hear from patients sometimes, from the women, is, oh, it doesn't matter if I get hit every now and then, it's okay.
mm,
It's not a big, at least my children have a house and things. What they are not seeing is that the hitting happens every now and then, and but in between there is always a thread of fear that connects each episode of the violence. But what they are not seeing is how it is impacting the growing child's brain. And we know that adverse childhood events, we now have absolute clear research that the more you are exposed to adverse childhood events, the more you are likely to have a mental illness in your adult years. And so, you know, drug abuse, alcohol, violence, depression, anxiety, psychosis, everything, all mental illnesses that can impair your ability to fulfill your potential
mm.
occur in the context of domestic violence.
And
and and the parents and the perpetrators have no they don't appreciate that. If they did, I mean, many people do change once they have children. They stop being so abusive because they are worried
Do
about
you
their
think so? Do you
yeah,
think so? So
yeah,
I'm going to then, there have been three questions here. I'm going to roll it all into one
yeah,
and ask you, Manjula. One
yeah,
is that, you know, we have movies like Animal and Kabir Singh, which glorify toxic male and are loved by the masses, which are both men and women. It's also that, when a woman is sharing what she's going through with her friends, they, the friends are also judging her. And how do we tackle this issue of the Raja Beta syndrome? And are we just normalizing family violence when we see children growing up, seeing their fathers, hitting their mothers once in a while?
yeah,
That last bit was mine because I cannot understand this women saying it's okay if I get beaten once in a while. What is once in a while? It should never happen. So
yeah,
that's what the children are growing up saying. Sorry, Manjula. I mean, yeah.
yeah, yeah, that's right. So it's about women feeling their own dignity and feeling their own um, power within them to say, I will not put up with anyone who demeans me, who puts me down, who humiliates me. I will not put up with that. And hitting is one of those things. If you ask a man, how would you feel if your wife slapped you? How would you feel if your wife slapped you? You would turn around and kill her because you'd feel so humiliated. And that is the point, is that men need to have that sense of empathy and compassion, that what they are doing to their women, if it happened to them, how would they feel about it? And that's the point we need to do have with our children, is how do we bring up our children so they have, especially the boys, and but also the girls, because I've also seen girls in our families who are so indulged, they grow up to be so abusive to their husbands. I've seen that. And so demanding and dominating, in a way that shows complete lack of awareness of their behavior on the other. And that is because the parents have not brought up their children to have empathy and compassion towards each other when they were growing up, and towards, and that may come from them watching their fathers, but it's up to the parents to bring up their children. And so we have put in a grant, a mental health education grant recently. I haven't still heard about it from the government as to whether we get it or not, in which we are planning to give parents parenting classes.
Healthy children. Um,
Yeah,
we've
yeah, because
gone
that's
over time. Yeah, sorry, Manjula. No, sorry, I keep interrupting you.
yeah, but that is the way to prevent future generations from um, family violence and having a harmonious home life, because that is eventually the only way you will and your children will grow up to be successful citizens and members of society.
Thank
That
you.
that sounds really good because when a child, like we are telling our girls, you can do anything and you get educated and all that, but we are not telling the boys to give space to the girls, to the, and that is where the problem, I see the problem that is increasing in the society, where the girls are educated, they are working, they're doing everything, but the boys have not been taught to give them space and give them respect. So yeah, that sounds good. Mm.
So, Veena,
Uh,
there's a last question for you for
Yeah.
Manjula.
Yeah, lastly, please tell us about your book, Daughters of Durga. What made you write it and how has the reception been? And if you could read something from the book, that would be really nice.
so why I wrote that book, Daughters of Durga, was actually uh, because I've seen hundreds of these women in my consulting room. I and I said that so often to the women that if there was any man who could listen to you speaking now, I'm sure they would not stop crying for a week. The stories I hear, you cannot imagine that there is such human cruelty that can be perpetrated from one person to another. And then I thought, how can I share this with the world? That when I am no longer practicing, that this knowledge should not be lost. I don't want this knowledge to be lost. And that's why that was my reason for starting to write that book. And then I started to research and go back, and I found I kept going further and further back in time and went back to the time of our first Vedas, Rig Veda, that really gave me an insight into how our family system uh, came about, and in how, in actual fact, our culture is so wise and knowledgeable, and there is so much. Even those years back, we knew about physics and chemistry and trigonometry and the astronomy and astrology and yoga and medicine, surgery, cesareans. It all, we were all doing that stuff, and where it has gone bad and why it has gone so bad. But patriarchy was always there. It's never not been there. But I do believe that our caste system has been influential in creating a lot of problems for in entrenching the power system within our society. Someone always has more power than someone else, and we can't get away from that concept of some. It's we become a very hierarchical society where someone has more power than someone else, and that is the reason behind honor killings and all kinds of abuses. So I wanted to capture the complexity of domestic violence in this book. Just let me grab hold of my book. And so I divided it up in 14 chapters. And chapter one is Women of India, that takes us back, right back, and brings us to the partition time and how, in fact, how resilient our women were and how we have them as role models. Chapter 2 is what a happy family looks like. Chapter 3, cost of a hierarchical society. Chapter 4, it reads, a daughter is only ever a guest in the father's home. Chapter 5 is called The Malady, Dowry Deaths. Chapter 6, Societal Fears Paralyzes Social Change. Chapter 7, Wish You Were a Son. Chapter 8, Caste and Honor Killings. Chapter 9, Huge Cost of Mental Illness in Domestic Violence. Chapter 10, Migration, Family and Suicide. Chapter 11, Education is the Key to Equality. Chapter 12, The Burden on Men of Indian Society. Chapter 13, Action Against Dowry Abuse in Australia. And the last chapter I wrote was The Way Forward and Manusmriti Reimagined, because a lot of the our uh, verses in Manusmriti are very toxic against women. So I decided, well, a lot of this is coming from there, so I'm going to rewrite it. So I'm going to read you that rewritten.
Very nice. Yeah.
Um, so here's my modern reimagining of Manusmriti. Chapter 5, verse 147. Ancient Manusmriti says, by a girl, by a young woman, or even by an aged one, nothing must be done independently, even in our own house. Right? That is the training.
Oh, oh
That
my.
is the training we were given. Manusmriti was written 2000 years ago.
Written by a man 2000 years ago.
Yeah, and it looks like maybe multiple men. So I reimagined it and I wrote, modern Manusmriti gives women agency, and it says, whether a girl, a young woman, or even an aged one, a woman will have freedom to act independently even in her own house. Um, verse 5, 1.148. Ancient Manusmriti shrinks her world. In childhood, a female must be subject to her father, in youth to her husband. When her lord is dead, to her son, a woman must never be independent. Modern Manusmriti reimagines gives women freedom, and it says, in childhood, a child must be subject to their mother and father. In youth, both a girl and her brother learn to share power and control. After marriage, a woman shares power and control with her husband, and when her husband is dead, she lives independently of her sons. A woman must always be independent.
Thank you. Thank you. I have to say, I have had amazing parents, never discriminated against my brother and me. And I have two girls who I couldn't have been prouder of. I've never wanted a son, never, ever.
Mm.
So,
No.
verse 5, uh, point 150, ancient Manusmriti says she must always be cheerful, clever in the management of her household affairs, careful in cleaning her utensils, and economical in expenditure. Modern Manusmriti gives women gender equality in the home. Man and woman must always be cheerful, clever in the management of household affairs, husband and wife together, careful in cleaning their utensils, and economic expenditure. And so on. So, the thing is that I wish more people would read that book because I have had such amazing feedback about this book from many levels of society, which is what I try to do. I, in fact, pitched it is a highly academic book, but it is written like a story in a very simple language. And it has knowledge, it has research, it has my own research, my clinical practice, societal values, anthropology, culture, um, modern world, uh, Australian society, migration, and mental health knowledge woven together in a complex tapestry that anyone can get anything that they want out of it. Policymakers, politicians, magistrates, judges, police, community service providers, students, community members, men and women, where it is particularly pitched at our community members, will get stuff out of it that they can use in their future life to guide them and to help them. And so, I got a feedback from someone telling me the other day that she was at a meeting with the magistrates, and the magistrates said they had read my book. I got a message from a PhD student in Adelaide saying how it had helped her in her personal life, but also in the PhD she's doing.
Mm.
Got a message from a beautiful message from a woman saying that a young Indian woman in Melbourne was getting married, and her fiance demanded dowry, and she called off the wedding 1 week before.
Thank you. Oh, this is such good news. Yeah.
I
Sharing
Baby
know.
steps,
stories is,
but steps all the same, isn't it?
yeah, and sharing stories is so powerful. That is what brings about the changes. And so, yeah,
Storytelling.
thank you, Matt.
Yeah, so yeah, that was the best story of the week for me that week. So I get amazing feedback from people who read the book, but I also saw somebody started a change. What's that thing that people can start a petition? Change. Uh, a petition to change the world. We can start those petitions, and so someone started a petition saying, how dare she take away the name of goddess Durga and abuse it in such a way? Well, it's not
We
abusing.
are all Durgas in our own ways.
It's not abusing anything. It's, if anything, it pays a great homage to goddess Durga,
Absolutely.
and
And the
that
strength.
and goddess Durga belongs to anyone, all of us. So not just to this particular man. So, but the stories in it are sometimes shocking because I reveal as much as I could. Because in fact, I don't say too much. I haven't said a lot of very, very abusive things that I hear because it could be too triggering.
Yeah.
But there's enough there for people to learn about what is going on out there. And I wish more Indian, our community members and South Asians would read the book. The Sri Lankan, lot of Sri Lankan people told me they've sent the book back home to their mothers, and so that's what needs to happen. Really, I get messages from women saying how it's opened their eyes and change their life. And the service providers tell me that it is very useful in the work they do, because before we started the dowry campaign, the girls did not know how to express it because they didn't believe they could express it because the service providers would not believe what they are saying. But our campaign allowed them to recognize that no, it's a word that people do understand in Australia, and that the service providers for the first time could make sense of the real root of the problem in a lot of these domestic violence cases. And that at least once you know what the problem is, you know how you can solve it and how you can stop it.
Mm, that's true.
Thank you. Thank you, Manjula. Thank you so much for your time. Veena, thank you for co-hosting.
Thank
We
you.
hope someday we all join in together to say this is